The haunting reels.
Tonight on Midnight Terror Tales, a painting that watches back. The gilded halls of Blackwood Manor held more than art. They held a curse, and tonight, Elias Carter would take it home. Her smile wasn't paint, it was hunger. The first rule of haunted paintings: never look away. Every portrait whispered his name, every step dragged him closer to her. The canvas tore, and then she stepped out. The last thing she saw: some art doesn't hang on walls, it hunts. The rain hammered against the windows of Blackwood Manor, a relentless cascade of water that seemed to mirror the storm raging within Elias Carter's chest. Standing before the tarnished mirror in the dimly lit grand hall, he adjusted his tie, the fabric slipping through his fingers as though mocking his attempt at composure. The estate auction was in full swing, a lavish event filled with the type of wealthy collectors and curious onlookers who viewed history as little more than a commodity. They milled about, eyes gleaming with anticipation, hoping to claim a rare artifact, an undiscovered treasure. But for Elias, this night wasn't about wealth. It was about obsession. He had come for one thing, and one thing alone: the infamous portrait of a forgotten woman. Rumors had surrounded the painting for years. Whispers in hushed corners claimed it was cursed, that it brought misfortune to anyone who gazed upon it too long. Others said the woman in the portrait moved when no one was looking, her hollow eyes following you through the room, her faint, unsettling smile never quite as still as it seemed. But Elias wasn't one to give in to superstition. To him, the painting was a lost masterpiece, a relic from a time long past, a creation by the elusive and reclusive artist Alistair Voss, who had vanished without a trace in 1893. The rumors in his mind were nothing but the fevered imaginings of those who had never truly understood art. When the auctioneer finally announced the piece, a hush fell over the crowd. The air in the room thickened, and Elias felt his pulse quicken. There it was, displayed in a gilded frame that seemed almost too delicate to support its weight, both physical and emotional. The portrait depicted a woman pale as porcelain, her skin almost translucent. Her eyes were hollow, drained of life, and yet there was something unsettlingly alive in their depths. Her lips were curled into a faint smile, the kind of smile that only deepened the mystery of her expression. Behind her, the background swirled in dark, tumultuous hues, as if the shadows themselves were alive, shifting and breathing within the confines of the canvas. Bidding starts at $10,000. The auctioneer's voice cut through the tension, echoing in the grand hall. Elias didn't hesitate. He raised his paddle, his hand steady despite the storm of emotions crashing inside him. The bidding began, and the room seemed to hold its breath as the price steadily climbed. An anonymous phone bidder joined the fray, their presence unseen but undeniable, pushing the price higher. The tension built, each bid feeling like a challenge, each moment a step closer to the object of his obsession. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the auctioneer's gavel slammed down. "Sold to Mr. Elias Carter," the auctioneer called, his voice carrying through the silence that followed. Elias's heart thudded painfully in his chest as he heard the words. He had won. But the price, the amount that now resided in his bank account, was enough to make him feel lightheaded, almost as if he had made a pact with something darker than he understood. As Elias carried the painting out of the manor, the wind howled, pushing against him as though trying to steal the prize from his hands. He could feel the eyes of the woman in the portrait upon him, even though it was securely wrapped. The sensation of being watched lingered, an inexplicable weight pressing down on him. He glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see the crowd still staring at him, but the courtyard was empty. The only sound was the rhythmic slap of the rain against the stone pathway. But as he reached his car, he couldn't shake the feeling. The woman's eyes, he was sure of it, had followed him, even through the wrapping, even from beneath the layers of canvas and frame. He could swear she had watched him every step of the way. And as he placed the painting into the back seat and shut the door, a shiver ran down his spine, one he couldn't quite explain. The storm outside raged on, and somewhere in the depths of Blackwood Manor, an ancient presence stirred. Elias hung the portrait in his study, the image of the woman captured so vividly on the canvas that it seemed to pulse with life. Under the warm golden glow of his desk lamp, he admired the brushstrokes, sharp, deliberate, yet somehow fluid, as if they contained secrets waiting to be unearthed. He had spent hours researching the artist, Voss, whose work had always intrigued him. But as the night deepened, the hours turned darker. He uncovered disturbing accounts of the artist's descent into madness. There were whispers accounts from witnesses who swore Voss had locked himself away in his studio, screaming about the woman in his latest piece. "She's whispering to me," he'd raved. "She wants something." The portrait became a puzzle, each discovery adding to the unsettling nature of Voss's obsession with his creation. That night, as Elias finally lay in bed, sleep refused to come. A faint scratching sound pierced the stillness of the house. Scritch, scritch, scritch. He sat up, his heart racing. The sound was unmistakable, a dry, persistent scraping. It was coming from the study. With every beat of his pounding heart, Elias crept from his bed, his feet silent on the cold floor. The house felt heavy, the air thick with an unseen weight. He approached the study door, his breath shallow. Something about the house seemed wrong, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. He pushed open the door. The moment he entered, a chill gripped him. The room was colder than it should have been, despite the warmth of the rest of the house. His breath puffed out in small clouds of frost, and the dim light from the desk lamp did little to pierce the growing darkness. The portrait hung as he left it, the woman's face still striking in its beauty. But something was off. Something had changed. Her smile was wider now, stretching unnaturally across her face. Her eyes, those eyes that had once held a serene mystery, now gleamed with something darker, something almost predatory. There was hunger in them, a hunger that was unmistakable. Elias stumbled backward, his breath quickening, his pulse thrumming in his ears. His hand shot out to slam the door shut. The cold air seemed to rush at him, eager to follow. He leaned against the door, heart pounding, telling himself it was all a trick of the light. The mind was a strange thing, capable of conjuring horrors where there were none. But even as the door blocked the sight, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Something was waiting. The next morning, he returned to the study, the warmth of the sun casting golden rays through the windows. The room was once again comfortably warm. The chill from the night before dissipated. He glanced at the portrait, half expecting to see the woman's twisted smile still there, mocking him. But to his relief, she was as she had been when he first hung the painting. Her face serene, her expression soft and inviting. Yet, as Elias stared at the portrait, he couldn't quite shake the feeling that something had shifted, that the woman, whoever she was was not as harmless as she appeared. Elias lay in the darkness, his body exhausted, but his mind wide awake, tangled in a restless fog. The hours stretched on, suffocating him. Then, at last, he drifted into the kind of sleep that is not so much restful as it is a shadowed limbo. The boundaries of dream and reality blurred. In his dream, he found himself standing at the entrance of a long, narrow hallway. The air was thick with a strange, oppressive stillness, as though the world beyond had ceased to exist. His gaze fell upon the walls, which were lined with portraits. Dozens, maybe hundreds. They were all the same woman, her face shifting in subtle ways, each image more haunting than the last. She smiled in one, her eyes glimmering with a secret. In another, her expression was cold, distant, as if she were staring through him. He couldn't look away, drawn to the hallway as if the portraits themselves were pulling him forward. The hallway stretched endlessly before him, its end shrouded in a murky, almost suffocating darkness. And at the farthest point, at the very end of it, there was a door. It stood ajar, as though inviting him, but something about it felt wrong, like the air around it was charged with the anticipation of something terrible. A soft, melodic voice echoed through the hallway, smooth and seductive, as if it was meant only for him. "Come closer, see what lies beneath." The voice was not unfamiliar. He had heard it before, in fleeting moments of consciousness, just beyond the edge of his awareness. Something about it made his heart race with both fear and yearning. Elias stepped forward, his feet heavy, each movement feeling like a struggle against the invisible force that sought to hold him back. His fingers reached out, trembling as they hovered just before the doorknob. The urge to open it, to see what lay beyond, was overpowering. His heart pounded, his breath shallow as he gripped the handle, ready to pull it open. And then, suddenly, his hand was yanked away. He awoke with a violent jolt, gasping for air. The remnants of the dream clung to him like a suffocating fog, but reality felt too sharp, too harsh in comparison. He screamed, shaking, his body drenched in cold sweat. The walls of his bedroom were too close, the silence too thick. The night outside his window seemed to mock him with its stillness. The dream was too vivid, too real. But there was no time to question it. He scrambled to sit up, his breath ragged, his pulse thundering in his ears. The morning light filtered through the curtains, pale and weak, offering no comfort. As Elias lay back down, trying to steady his breathing, his gaze fell upon the pillow beside him. There, amidst the tangled sheets, was a single, long black hair. It was impossibly smooth, shiny even, and completely out of place. Elias froze. He lived alone. No one else had been in his apartment. His heart dropped as he realized there was only one explanation. The woman from the portraits had followed him. Determined to uncover the truth, Elias made his way to the local historical society, the building standing like a relic from another time. It was old, the kind of place that seemed to hold on to its secrets with a stubborn grip. Inside, rows of dusty shelves filled with old books and documents loomed over him. At the front desk sat an elderly archivist, Miss Graves, whose frail hands rested on a collection of yellowed papers. She looked up as he approached, her eyes sharp despite her years. When Elias showed her the painting, her expression darkened instantly. She squinted at the canvas, her fingers trembling slightly as she took it from him. "That thing should have been burned," she hissed under her breath, her voice low and filled with something close to fear. Alistair Voss didn't just disappear. He was taken. Miss Graves went on to explain the strange and horrifying history behind the painting. Alistair Voss, a celebrated artist in the 1800s, had painted the portrait of a woman named Lilith Duvall, a mysterious figure who was rumored to be a witch, a dark, malevolent force that had plagued the town with curses and disappearances. Her presence was whispered about in hushed tones, and some believed she had the power to control the lives of those around her. Voss's obsession with Lilith had been consuming, and the townspeople began to notice that his work became darker as he painted her more and more frequently. But it wasn't until after Voss's disappearance that the full horror of the painting came to light. "Every owner of that painting has died," Miss Graves whispered, leaning in closer as though sharing a forbidden secret. Their bodies were found, hollowed out, as if something had eaten them from the inside. The authorities said it was some kind of strange disease, but those who knew better knew it was something far worse. Elias felt a chill crawl up his spine, but he tried to laugh it off. This was just folklore, he thought. Superstition, a strange coincidence. But the trembling in his hands betrayed him as he grabbed the painting from her and rushed out of the building. He had to get home. He had to think. That night, as Elias lay in bed, the darkness of the room pressed in on him. His thoughts raced, but so did something else. An unsettling scratching sound, faint but distinct, echoed through the house. It started near the ceiling, as if something was clawing its way through the attic. Elias tried to ignore it, but then it moved closer. Sounded as though it was inside the walls themselves, scraping, scratching, clawing its way toward him. His heart pounded. He jumped out of bed, his legs shaking as he approached the source of the noise. His breath caught in his throat as the scratching grew louder, almost frantic, as if whatever was inside the walls was desperate to get out. He froze. The room seemed to close in around him, the sound growing unbearably loud. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the scratching stopped. Elias stood in the silence, his skin crawling, unable to move. Was it his mind playing tricks on him, or was it something more? He glanced at the painting on the wall, its cold, lifeless eyes staring back at him. The night seemed endless as he lay awake, the eerie silence broken only by the occasional creak of the house settling. But deep in his gut, he knew. Whatever had haunted the previous owners was now coming for him. The painting wasn't just a piece of art, it was a doorway, and something was waiting on the other side. The next night he could feel it. It was only a matter of time before the scratching returned. Days bled into each other, dragging on with an oppressive heaviness that Elias could not shake. The weight of the painting in the corner of his living room hung over him like a dark cloud, its presence undeniable, suffocating. He had become a ghost in his own life. His reflection in the mirror looked alien, a stranger who resembled him only faintly. His face had become gaunt, skin stretched tight over bones, and his eyes, those eyes once vibrant, were now hollow and bloodshot, sunken deep beneath dark circles. The more time passed, the more it seemed that the painting, with its haunting, ethereal woman, was bleeding into his thoughts, his mind. It was as if it was slowly taking over, consuming him from within. No matter where he went, he could not escape it. The air itself seemed heavy with its presence, like the walls of his home were closing in on him. He could feel it watching, waiting. And then, one evening, when the last rays of twilight had faded into darkness, it happened. A voice, soft and laced with something desperate, sliced through the thick silence. It wasn't his own mind playing tricks on him. He was sure of it. Elias, the whisper drawn out and forlorn, seemed to echo from somewhere distant, yet near. It came from the study. Elias's body responded involuntarily, as if it had a mind of its own, guiding him forward. His legs carried him toward the room, each step heavier than the last, his heart pounding harder, louder in his chest. The world around him blurred, the edges of his perception fraying like the pages of an old forgotten book. He stood in front of the study door, hand trembling as it hovered above the doorknob. The air was thick, a sense of dread pooling in his stomach. But before he could turn away, before he could even think to resist, his hand twisted the knob and the door creaked open. The study was shrouded in an eerie stillness, the only sound the soft rustling of paper as the air shifted. The painting, the one he had been trying to avoid, was there too, though it seemed different now. The surface rippled like water disturbed by a stone, as if the very fabric of the canvas was alive. And then he saw it. The woman, her face twisted in a silent plea, pressed her hand against the painting, her fingers curling against the surface as if she were trying to break through. Her eyes, wide with longing and desperation, locked with his, and Elias felt a chill run down his spine. "Let me out," she whispered, her voice fragile yet filled with a strange power. It was a command, a request, and a warning all at once. Elias, his mind clouded by the dark allure of her voice, reached out. His fingers trembled as they stretched toward the canvas, drawn to her like a moth to flame, a compulsion that was both terrifying and irresistible. His fingertips brushed the surface, and in that instant, everything shattered. The world around him dissolved into a void of inky blackness, the silence deafening. There was no sound, no light, no sense of time or space, just an overwhelming nothingness. And then, as if the very fabric of reality had unraveled, Elias felt himself pulled into it, into the painting, into the darkness, and then there was nothing. When Elias awoke, he knew instantly that something was wrong. The familiar creak of his bedroom floor, the soft hum of the heater gone. Instead, there was a vast silence, heavy and oppressive, pressing against his chest. He sat up slowly, disoriented, and found himself standing, not in his warm, cluttered room, but in a grand, decaying hall. He recognized it immediately. It was the hall from his dreams. The vaulted ceiling arched high above, its murals faded and peeling like ancient skin. Dust hung in the air, thick and glittering in the slivers of cold gray light that trickled through broken windows. Along the cracked walls, portraits lined either side of the corridor, hundreds of them glaring down at him with lifeless, painted eyes. Yet now, as he stood there, Elias could swear the portraits were alive, their gazes sharp with malice, tracking his every move. At the far end of the corridor, a door stood ajar, swinging slightly on rusted hinges. He was drawn to it, though every instinct in his body screamed to turn back. Inside, waiting for him, was the woman from the painting, the one he'd dreamt of for months, the one he'd tried so hard to forget. But she was no longer the beautiful, sorrowful figure he remembered. Her true form was monstrous, a skeletal wraith draped in tattered remnants of a gown, her elongated limbs twitching and jerking with unnatural spasms. Her mouth, God, her mouth stretched impossibly wide into a grotesque grin, revealing rows of blackened, splintered teeth. "You should have left me buried," she hissed, her voice dry and brittle, like dead leaves scraping across stone. Panic surged through Elias. He spun on his heel, desperate to flee, but the hallway betrayed him. The walls seemed to stretch and warp, growing longer and longer before his eyes. The door he'd come through shrinking into darkness. The portraits along the walls began to move, their arms reaching out, hands clawing, fingers like cold iron shackles seizing his clothes, his hair, his flesh. He struggled, thrashed, but they dragged him back, inch by inch, toward the open door where the creature waited. Closer, closer. The last thing Elias saw before the darkness swallowed him whole was the woman's mouth, splitting open even wider, impossibly wide, until it seemed she could swallow the world itself. And then, nothing. A week had passed since Elias had last been seen. His sudden disappearance from their scheduled meetings had troubled Dr. Rebecca Shaw more than she cared to admit. At first, she had told herself he was simply engrossed in his latest obsession, some new discovery, another late-night project. But after days of unanswered calls and no sign of him at the university, worry gnawed at her resolve. That evening, Rebecca drove to his house, the sky overcast and heavy with the promise of rain. She hesitated at his front steps, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for the doorknob. To her surprise, the door creaked open at her touch. It was unlocked. Inside, the house was deathly quiet. Shadows stretched across the floorboards, long and unmoving, like they belonged to another world entirely. Rebecca called his name once, twice, but only the hollow echo of her own voice answered her. She moved toward the study, where Elias spent most of his time. A chill hit her the moment she crossed the threshold, sharp and unnatural, as if the room itself had forgotten how to hold warmth. Her breath fogged in the air. There, above the fireplace, hung the painting, the one Elias had spoken about in hurried, half-mad whispers during their last conversation. It looked untouched, the colors vivid, the brush strokes impossibly delicate. The woman in the painting stared back at Rebecca with an expression that was almost knowing, but Elias was gone. His desk was a mess of scattered papers and overturned books, yet in the center, placed with deliberate care, was his leather-bound journal. Rebecca approached and opened it with trembling fingers. The final entry, written in a frantic, slashing hand, sent a spike of fear through her chest. She's real, and now she's free. Rebecca closed the journal slowly, her pulse hammering in her ears. Something felt wrong, very wrong. She turned to leave, her instincts screaming at her to get out, to run, to never look back. And that's when she saw it, out of the corner of her eye, just for a second. The woman in the painting, so still, so lifeless, winked at her. Rebecca froze, every hair on her body standing on end. When she dared to look again, the woman's expression was once more perfectly serene, her gaze as flat and empty as any portrait. Rebecca didn't wait to see more. She fled the house, the door slamming shut behind her with a final, resounding bang. Somewhere inside, the painting watched and waited.